Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. We should be able to get this through, depending on question and answer, by no later than 6 p.m. So I appreciate your patience. Appreciate Rachel and the staff for inviting me up to do this presentation. Elkhart Lake's been a love affair with me for the last 30 plus years. Interesting considering I grew up just blocks from the Milwaukee Mile. Initially, I was a Milwaukee Mile guy, still am, but I think as Wisconsin fans, we're blessed to have such two notable racetracks so close together, and they can operate easily within each other. Both can support Indy Car races, and in the past NASCAR races and other series. So we're certainly blessed to have a track like Road America. But what's interesting is I think a lot of people who just come to the track are missing half of it, because the other half is the town. And we're going to talk a little bit about the town, the history of it, and it's basically its love affair with auto racing. And that goes back to basically about 1950. Elkhart Lake had a very successful resort community before World War II. And then for whatever reason, after World War II, the resorts noticed a downturn in visitors coming up after the war. So like Jim Johnson, the bank president at Elkhart Lake, and others got together. What can we do? And Watkins Glen, New York, almost a sister town in upstate New York, was doing these road racing. And so they thought, hey, that might work for us. So in 1950, they decided to have a race. And it was interesting, some of the people that were involved. I mean, you had heavy hitters like Jim Kimberly, who was an heir to the Kimberly-Clark fortune, and Fred Wacker, whose family had huge involvement in Chicago, and it's not named after him, but the family, Laura Wacker Drive, and Wacker Drive is named with the family. So they said, hey, let's do it. And the SCCA, the Sports Club of America, jumped on board, and they were like, yeah, this is something that should work. So in 1950, they had the first race, and it was, like it says, it was a success from the start. And so I love this photo. You can see this is at the corner. Seepkins would be right over on your right, and it looks like the same today. You can take that photo today, and it looks almost, you can see exactly where the photographer, and they were doing test drives and that, and it really helped drum up a lot of interest from the people and around. What's going on in Elkhart Lake? Something's going on, and it was auto racing. And you can see here, they got to see the cars up close. I mean, it's amazing. 1950, it was a different world, though, if you think of it. You got these fans sitting, these cars whizzing past them at 100 miles an hour. Today we'd go, I don't think that's the best idea. But hey, we got hay bales and that. But this is, if you think of it, though, this is the World War II generation. A lot of these guys were fighting in Germany and in the Pacific. This was not much of a thing for them. It was like, okay, it's nothing, no big deal. So in the first year, they had about 5,000 in the first year. And they thought, hey, that's pretty good. We're getting our names in the paper, not only in Green Bay, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac papers, but Milwaukee, Chicago, and across the nation. Next thing you know, Elkhart Lake is in the news. So they thought, hey, we should do this again. And what's interesting, for those who aren't aware, there were 3 track configurations. So in 1952 was what's considered the long track. And I think if I could see any of the races, I think 52 would be the neatest, just because of the way the track configuration was. And it was fast. So by the third year, they were expecting over 100,000 people to come out. Now, it's kind of it's a good thing but bad thing. It was so popular But the problem that the organizers were having, how do you get all those people to pay? So they kind of knew that most of them are going to pay, but we can only do so much. Because the previous photo, if you look here, I mean, the track was so big. I mean, this is going down by what's considered the marsh turn, and you got such a big area. How are you going to police that? So, but yeah, 100. They had, some people say 150. So a lot of people say 5,000, 15 to 50,000, and then there's all sorts. But I think it's easily they could say you could have almost 100,000 people here in 1952. So Jim Kimberly in his Fred Ferrari 166, he won a 20-lap main event in 1950. Beautiful car. I mean, that's a priceless car today. So this is an interesting part. So in 1952 and 1953, the state legislature banned racing on public roads. So when they did the 52 race, it was illegal, but they kind of let it go. Nobody enforced it. So there's a lot of books, but everybody said, okay. So the writing was on the wall that, this was going to be the last one. And surprisingly, that was really the only wreck that they had. So how did they get the money? So this goes, we're talking about Road America. So they knew they had to do something different. But they liked, Elkhart Lake loved all the visitors coming up here. So what can we do? Well, we need to build a racetrack. So how are we going to do that? So they thought, they got all the movers and shakers together, and they divided to come up with a company to offer shares. And they were able to raise $75,000. And it was financed via a private stock in Road America Inc. And so next thing you know, they started to excavate. Thanks to Cliff Tufte, who had the land available and was able to negotiate with with some of the farmland around it, and they were able to get the land available. And the initial 525 acres, and they built the four-mile track, laying it out. And what's interesting, and is one of my favorite stats about the track, is that footprint that was laid out in 1955 is still the exact same footprint today. They've made safety changes, but the actual track layout has not changed. Very, very rare in road racing. So while they were building it in 1954, the SCCA was so impressed with the early progress that they went ahead and scheduled a national event for 1955. So they said, hey, these guys know what they're doing. Let's make this a big national event, which they did. So this is the informal dedication that they did. And you got Jim Kimberly, who was involved with the road racing, but you got Cliff Tufte, of course, and Harley Irby, who was the vice president of General Motors. So you had a lot of high rollers involved, and they immediately saw, hey, this track has a lot of potential. And this is one of my quotes too. Sheboygan Press sports editor. They were still pounding in the nails in the morning of the first race, which is not unusual. So, and of course that's the iconic finish with Sherwood Johnson and future world champion Phil Hill.
Is that the first race?
That's the first race. And this is afterwards at the party. You got Jim Kimberly here, and Sherwood Johnson, and Phil Hill from Harley Earl. So head of General Motors, of course, one of the most iconic people in automobiles and in the industry. And Jim Kimberly is one of the most interesting characters. We'll talk about more him. The following year, NASCAR came to town, and we see the iconic Hall of Famer Glenn Fireball Roberts coming up the hill from turn 5. And they were excited to come here. So the backstory in this, so when NASCAR started, they were getting some success right away. And they wanted to race at the Milwaukee Mile in the worst way. And they approached Tom Marchese, who was the president of Wisconsin Auto Racing at the time, said, hey, we really would love to come here. Tom said, I would, but I would lose my AAA sanction for the Indy Car races. And that was, the big ticket. So he politely declined. So, and Bill France was a big proponent. He was doing well in the Southeast, obviously, but he wanted to expose it to other people. So very early on, he was going into the Northeast and all the way up to New York State, and he wanted to get into the Midwest. So eventually racing at Road America, later at Meadowdale, and through the ARCA racing and that. So yeah, it was very, very important for NASCAR to kind of get their footprint. They wanted at least, if not race there every year, but at least get their name out there. And of course, this is the Ron Nelson photo of the winner, Tim Flock, and one of the most iconic photos of the weekend, if not in the overall history of Road America, which turned out Tim Flock is one of the NASCAR gentlemen. He was a Southern gentleman. Had a chance to talk to him on the phone once, and he was just a neat guy, and that turned out to be his last win. And this is so this is after the race, and this is one of these photos you just look at. It's just such a neat photo because you have such a wide variety of people here. You have Paul Whiteman, who was a big band leader back in the day and was a huge race fan. And then you got Miss Wisconsin, Cannonball Baker. He was the first person to go cross country in a motorcycle back in like 1908 or something. And he was a NASCAR judge or something. It was he was basically their mascot. They just loved having him around, and he was quite the character. Of course, then you got Tim Flock and then Bill Strope, the car owner. And the famous pagoda, of course. Road America's pagoda initially housed race controls, timing, and media, and they ended up making expansions to it and whatnot, and finally, it had to be torn down. And I remember people would talk glowingly, and our friend, of course, a lot of people here know him, Tom Schultz, and that, and he's always go to these people, were you in the pagoda ever? He says, at the end, it stunk. There's so much mold and mildew in there, and it was littered with flies and whatnot. He says, it was not a pleasant place in the late 80s.
The fire department?
Yeah. Yeah, they eventually, So Briggs Cunningham was one of those iconic racers early on in sports car racing. And he was an interesting guy. He came from money. And he was a gentleman, what they called a gentleman driver. And he was very, very emphatic, wishing that the sports car drivers stayed at gentleman drivers, meaning amateur, because it would be beneath them to accept money for racing. And it was people like Phil Hill, later Dan Gurney, and a few others who came up and said, hey, we need to do this for a living. And as the tide was starting to change, and there wasn't much more he could do at that time, it eventually became a pay series. But he was he was an advocate. It's kind of funny because it's one of those blind spots, and you look back now and you go, why would he take that stance? But he was an East Coaster. And he was one of these guys that came from old money, and it was one of those things. It was a thing. He didn't want to race for money, so it was just you saw that actually in football too, where a lot of people who thought it would be beneath them to go from college football to pro football. That's your profession, or to play football. So it wasn't about this time when the 50s and into the 60s when you really saw pro football started to take off too. It was quite the stigma. And Jim Kimberly. I love this photo. So I did a book on Road America about 10 years ago, and NASCAR was one of the editors, and they rejected this photo. I wanted this photo in there so bad because this epitomizes Jim Kimberly. So Jim Kimberly, beautiful hauler. This has been colorized, but Jim Kimberly would be considered a ladies' man. And he always had pretty girls all around him. This shot epitomizes it. There's always ladies around his cars, and was always had a different lady perhaps every weekend. But he was quite the ladies' man. And of course, a purple people eater. And when you think of Road America, you also think of iconic cars. And of course, from Nicky Chevrolet, this Corvette won so many races with drivers such as Jim Jeffords and that. And it's just, that's one of the things that makes Road America so iconic, is it's not only the drivers and the track itself, but it's also cars like this that were just worshipped by people today. I mean, when this car shows up, whether you're a Corvette guy, just a big block guy, anything, it's just one of the most iconic race cars of all time. One of my favorite car stories of all time, the Maserati Tipo 61. So Jim Jeffords purchased this car from Frank Harrison, who also would later dabble in the Indy Car racing in it, and he wrote him a check with no money in the account. And this would have been on like a Wednesday. And he towed the car up to Road America, won the race, and got the money in there in time, was able to cover the check. But he wrote the check knowing he did not have the money to cover it. But he was so confident in this car that he figured, I bet you we can win this thing. And they ended up winning it. And
I wonder if he posted it.
yeah. And then once again, you talk about iconic cars, the Tipo 61s are just one of the birdcage Maseratis, as they're known. It's such an iconic car.
A different tail.
Yeah, it was also raced at Le Mans and that, yeah. So, and you thought that would really work well at Road America too, which it did, of course. And then the era, the golden era of racing. A lot of people consider the 60s and especially the early 70s as the golden era of racing. You look back at whether even drag racing, sports car racing, Indy Car racing, NASCAR, you name it. It seemed like everything was just building up. Hence, even USAC came out and said, auto racing, the sport of the 70s. And it certainly was. I mean, you look at the Briggs Cunningham cars here, and you got just the beautiful cars here racing at Road America in the 500, Road America 500. So Road America 500, it was what's interesting about that. This is an interesting story here. So Honest John Kilbourne, Howard Hively won a race in a Ferrari 375. And Cliff Tufte realized just 4 more laps, it would have been 500. So from 1957, it became the Road America 500 and promoted as the first 500-mile sports car race in history. And he received the iconic Shelby Cobras in '63, which turned out to be one of the most biggest upsets in history when Bill Wiestoff and Augie Pabst won in what some people would consider the underpowered Porsche Speedster. Can-Am. Once again, you talk about the 60s and 70s and iconic, the glory days of racing. The Can-Am series can definitely be considered part of that. Can-Am racing, of course, was a big draw at Road America from 66 to 74. Group 7 sports cars that a lot of us are familiar with here. Of course, was dominated by Bruce McLaren and Denny Hulme. And then, of course, George Follmer and Mark Donohue. And this is another one of these great stats is you got Mark Donohue broke the track record in '73, and that record stood for 11 years. It wasn't broken until Mario Andretti broke it in a Lola at a kart race, the Indy Car race. And of course, famous drivers. Just a great photo. Dan Gurney, of course, who we're celebrating this weekend, and he got the iconic Cliff Tufty, which well-deserved, has a bronze trophy right on Main Street on top of the hill. And so drivers around the world, and of course the greatest American drivers, would race at Road America. You're talking about Bruce McLaren here, which of course dominated, and you got John Surtees, world champions. So you would have world champion drivers like Jackie Stewart come here through Can-Am, and then of course Mark Donohue, one of the great American drivers, and so many. Even Roger Penske drove in one here at Road America before he moved into the business side of it and excelled on that side. Of course, you got Jim Hall too, the Chaparral out of Midland, Texas. Very, very just a knowledgeable driver, one of the most interesting characters in racing. Of course, Carroll Shelby too. Shelby is such an iconic person, not only in auto racing, but also in the worlds of automobiles with his Shelbys, Shelby Cobras and whatnot, Shelby Mustangs. And of course, the aforementioned Roger Penske, all the way back in 1959. And Pierre Perrin, I wanted to mention. He was from Milwaukee, and he wrote for Midwest Racing News, I believe it was, and several others, and sports car newsletters and whatnot. Iconic photographer and writer who is unfortunately kind of forgotten today. And of course, Derek Bell. You got Walt Hankskin, Brian Redman, who is the event this weekend is named after, Peter Revson, and Al Hobart. Of course, who can not forget those Lowen Brawl Porsche 962s. And Formula 5000, of course. Very popular series up here. This is one of their, you could almost call it hubs, starting back in 1969. Of course, and you have Al Unser here, but also Mario Andretti drove for the Viceroy team. Brian Redman excelled. And of course, you got David Hobbs in the lower photo in a beautiful Surtees TS5. And then the Trans Am series. This is one of the most interesting series, and it kind of shows you from a business side what happens, how automobile manufacturers have so much power in auto racing. So starting in '66, you had it was endorsed and promoted. Of course, the Ford Mustang, Chevrolet Camaro, the Plymouth, Pontiac, AMC, all was involved. Pumped a lot of money, very popular and good racing too. But when they pulled out, there is nothing much left. And of course, David Hobbs, local resident, he's a Road America icon, whether it was back in 1979 winning the Pabst 500 with Derek Bell in that famous BMW, the McLaren M20 in the Carling Black Label cars, and then of course with his ruffian children there in Victory Lane.
One on the right is a good look at. Is that George Clooney?
And I don't have a good answer to it, and I've never really heard an answer. Why didn't Indy Car come to Road America until why did it wait till 1982? And Indy Car went to Mid Ohio in 1980, Watkins Glen too, and in the 60s they were going to tracks like Brainerd, Continental Divider Raceway, Kent, Washington, all these other places. They never went to Road America. But here, 1982 was the first race. And one of my favorite stories, Hector Rabake. So Hector Rabake is one of these great stories. So he came from a means, from a South American driver, raced Formula One for 5 years. And he decided to go IndyCar racing, and he had backing from Carta Blanca, and it was a $500,000 deal. Carta Blanca gave him the $250,000. The Mexican economy crashed, and that's a Gerald Forsyth car, And he's going, where's our money? Where's our money? And the problem with Hector, great road racer, not good on the road on ovals. Wrecked at Milwaukee, very, very heavy, got knocked out, got into an accident with AJ Foyt at Michigan. And finally they said, you're costing us too much money and we don't have the other money. We're just going to run you on the road courses. So behind his back, they said, you know what, Road America is the last race we're going to run with you. And of course, he didn't know that, but he ended up winning the race. So Hector Abake only led one lap. It was the last lap.
All you need.
He ended up winning the race, and it was the last lap he ever competed in Indy Car. And of course, he had the track record that was broken, and it was broken again then in 2000 by Dario Franchitti, and that iconic cool racing, green racing car, a gorgeous car, and that still stands today. Has not been broken. And of course, 1968, the film Winning was filming, and they did a sequence at Elkhart Lake. So, of course, obviously starring Paul Newman, and it was the fictional Redburn 200, and it featured, of course, Joanne Woodward. One of the few times they actually acted together, along with Robert Wagner, and it had Newman driving that McKee Mark 7, that wedge type Can-Am car, and what really was the cool thing is they had about 300 local extras, and if you I'm sure tomorrow night when they bring the race cars into town, a couple of those people may be in there. So you never know. And it was one of the kind of, and what blows me away is that scene where he finally meets Joanne Woodward for the first time, and they go to the firehouse. Boy, that looks like Elkhart Lake. It's not, though. It's a studio. And of course, Paul Newman eventually fell in love with racing. There's that McKee Mark 7 behind there. And Paul Newman is one, he fell in love with racing. And I think it was Bob Sharp. He went to Bob, it was either Bob Sharp or Bondurant. He says, I want to learn racing. And he asked him, do you want to learn racing or do you want to just race cars? And Newman says, no, I want to do this the right way. So he bombed around in the lower classes of the SCCA for a good 5 years and learned his craft. And then eventually started to move up into the bigger cars and eventually Trans Am. In fact, all the way up to the 800 horsepower Trans Am cars of the 90s. So he did it the right way, and he did. Tom Cruise is doing Days of Thunder, and they had met through the Way You Use It or whatever, the follow up, the Pool movie, and so they were friends. And Newman is telling him, you got to take your time with this. Don't rush into it. Cruise was a young kid. He's like, no. And he ended up just rushing into it. He did some racing. He ended up crashing, and he ended up being frustrated. And sure enough, moved on to other things.
Yes.
And of course, the June sprints. One of the largest running events, and it's the premier amateur event besides the SCCA runoffs. And once again, it was Cliff Tufte. As Tom Schultz explains in his book, he said that to Tufte, anything under several hours was a sprint, hence the international June sprints, because he had the Road America 500 and these other races, and he thought, these are neat little sprint races, which kind of makes sense. And then NASCAR came back. So, of course, they ran here in 1956, and it wasn't until 2010. The reason why was in 2009, I was working at the Milwaukee Mile. And I did a bunch of jobs within media. I was the historian. We did a lot of stuff with pre-race and whatnot. And I see a couple people go into a room, and I hear some yelling, I hear some shouting, and I'm like, oh boy, what's going on? They didn't have enough money to pay the sanctioning fee. And that's a big thing to NASCAR. That's a big no-no. And the problem that we were running into at the Milwaukee Mile is, I always tell people, the sanctioning bodies liked the operations of it. It was, as we called it, up on the hill where the offices were off of 77th and Greenfield. The money wasn't always there. And we had issues with sponsorships and whatnot. And at the time, Wisconsin State Fair Park treated you as a tenant, not as a partner. So there were some issues there. They weren't very supportive of racing at the time at the Milwaukee Mile. So there were some other issues involved in it. But they would try to cobble together this group. So I ended up, the last 4 years I worked there, I ended up working for 3 promotional groups. And it was, so they pulled out of Milwaukee Mile and they decided to go up to Road America, which became a very, very successful event for them. And of course, Indy Car too, IMSA. So it's a shame. It's a shame what NASCAR went chasing money, by going to Chicago. The story behind that is that they were chasing a particular corporate sponsor, a big whale, you want to call it, if a sponsor in sales, whatever you want to call it. And they thought racing downtown would maybe seal the deal. It did not. They kind of turned their back. The people at Road America were aware of this, but did not burn any bridges. And we are always welcome back. So surprisingly, they reopened Chicagoland Speedway, which does not always happen, but it's actually been happening a few times, because the Chicagoland Speedway, they reopened North Wilkesboro and Rockingham. But I still say for their others, even if they didn't bring Cup here, I think having a truck series and the O'Reillys now, which I still is the Busch series to me, I would be successful. And of course, IMSA. IMSA is really an interesting series now. It's got a lot of manufacturer involvement in that, and it's been challenging Indy Car as the biggest weekend up here. So they've been getting great crowds, and thumbs up to to IMSA and their management for what they've been doing. And preserving the future, of course, Historic Race Circuits Preservation Society. So I think it was 2004, they wanted to redo some of the highways around here, which the original racetrack was on. And word got out, and they were able to, they just petitioned to tell them not to do it. And then they actually, what they found out is, well, if it's a historic landmark or whatever, that you could maybe do something that way. And so that's what they did. They went in that direction, and they were able to stop it and keep the basically the same shape. So the roads that if you follow they got these cool signs, these really neat signs. You can follow the circuit to this day. It's really neat, and it's pretty much the same topography, whatever you want to call it, is the same as it was back in 1952. So they do a great job. They have a great events. They're doing an event tonight here at the Throttle Stop, and it's a worthy. I highly recommend joining it, and they have a great website too. So make sure you look them up, please, if you're not already a member. And once again, Elkhart Lake continues to embrace racing. I think that's so important to have a partnership. When you're a racetrack, that's one thing I can think the city of West Dallas is kind of missed out on. Hence, at first I was against the Milwaukee Mile because it is actually in West Dallas. But West Dallas is kind of really always turned their back on. Whenever we tried to get them involved, when I worked at the Milwaukee Mile, and from a Civic point of view, they always kind of rejected it. Whereas Elkhart Lake, knowing that racetrack is so important to get people here and to generate and assist the businesses that work here, it is a win-win situation. And especially over the last 20 years, I mean, it's incredible, the growth of the events out here, not only at the track, but also in the village of Elkhart Lake. And yeah, a lot of good times. I mean, you come out here on Friday night, it is incredible the amount of people that come in into Elkhart Lake. It's just a fantastic event, and it's just a really great time. So recommend it, and thank you guys for coming out. If we have time, if you guys have any questions,